Welcome to Cluster Comparison. If you are going to be making notes, you will need to write the following headings: speaker, situation, structure, poetic device, language device, and context. Let's begin. We're going to be comparing The Prelude with Ozymandias. And the first comparison we're going to look at is with regards to speaker. In The Prelude, there is one speaker who, although he is what you might say is a reflective speaker, he sees his actions in a rather romanticized way and not for what his actions really are. He begins the poem, as an example, with the line, "One summer evening, led by her." His actions are not dictated by himself, he believes. He believes rather that the boat draws him and makes him do what it is that he then goes on to do. In Ozymandias, we have three main speakers. The first speaker is a reflective speaker, and the second is an informative one. We then move, as the poem moves, into being introduced to the ruthless speaker, who is in fact Ozymandias. But the last voice heard is that of the reflective speaker. Now, this isn't by accident. Shelley wants the reader to recognize this level of reflection is something that remains throughout time, rather than the voice of force and brutality. In the voice of the speaker that ends the poem, you hear the words "boundless and bare, and nothing beside remains." It is the idea that there is this cognitive process of thinking that takes place on seeing or hearing of the major events that happen through time. Let's move on to situation. In The Prelude, Wordsworth creates a speaker who steals a boat and travels down a river, only to be overcome by the vastness of nature. In Ozymandias, we have a situation in which one man meets another man, the poem beginning with "I met a man," and this by itself gives the sense of someone learning something from another person that he would not ordinarily have learnt by himself. It is this chance encounter that enables him to discover about the derelict statue and indeed about the past ruler Ozymandias. If we go to structure, we have one lengthy poem. Each line that Wordsworth uses employs iambic pentameter to create a regularity and a constant rhythm that reflects, first of all, the stable security felt by the speaker, and then shifts, and that security is then something that is seen, that exists within nature itself. If we look at the structure of Ozymandias, we have a one-stanza poem, the classic sonnet form. However, this sonnet isn't about love for somebody else, it's about love for himself, Ozymandias, and love for his empire. If we go to the heading poetic device, often students struggle to identify how sibilance is used and why it's used. We see an example of the use of sibilance in the line, "and still, for so it seemed." And this is at the point in the poem where nature has just revealed itself to the speaker, but that revelation isn't stationary or still, it is growing. And there you have that quiet, insidious threat of danger with the use of sibilance in that line. If we look at a poetic device for Ozymandias, we have the volta in line 12, which in truth is brutal in exposing the lie immediately before it, in which Ozymandias, after claiming to be King of Kings and asking for rulers to look on his works and despair, the vaulter reveals that nothing is actually left of his work and that there is nothing to despair of, or no one to despair of. So the vaulter here works to really turn things around and reveal, if you like, the lie within the despotism that we see in Ozymandias. If we look at language device in the prelude and just look at the extended metaphor that Wordsworth begins the poem with, he says that he was led by her, the boat, as if the boat has taken on the form of a seductress. And this metaphor continues with the boat being referred to as an elfin pinnace. And the elfin idea was that at the time, elves and fairies and creatures of that like were associated with the more passionate side of life, the more intimate side of life. And in doing this, he creates the idea that the speaker was mesmerized by nature and that there is a closeness between nature and man that helps to define him. If we look at a language device in Ozymandias, what Shelley does is Shelley uses very simple but very powerful adjectives such as shattered in front of the word visage. On the surface, the shattered word reveals that the head we see half buried in the sand is broken. Now, if we think about the word shattered and what it means, we get a far more informative view that this head is broken beyond repair, that it cannot be put back together again in the way that it originally was. If we see the head as reflective of the empire of Ozymandias, what we see is an empire that no longer exists in the way it did before and cannot ever be constructed again how that empire was before. If we look at the heading context, we recognize that the poet for the prelude, Wordsworth, he believed as a romantic poet that nature was part of the order of the world and that nature was a force that exerted influence in a way that was difficult to comprehend, but that it was a necessary force. If we think about context in Ozymandias, what we have is the idea that Shelley and many artists of the time like him believed that the pen was mightier than the sword. And what that meant was that the work of the artist held far more influence and far more power than the ruthless rule of the dictator or the governing body. Thank you for listening. Look forward to seeing you again.